Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Wednesday, May the 14th, 2025. A couple of days ago I talked about the full moon that we had last Monday, and I said, talking about this full moon, that it might have an impact on JD Vance, the US Vice President, and I wanted to follow it through in this video by having another look at JD Vance in greater detail than I did on Monday. You know, he is the Vice President of the United States. He's an important person. It was suggested to me by one of my commenters, Niles Glynn 8727, that I talk about JD Vance and perhaps his relationship with the EU and with Marco Rubio. And so I thought it would be a good idea to follow through with that and, look at what is happening to JD Vance at the moment and have another look at this full moon, because although the full moon was a couple of days ago, I think that it is still very much in effect. But before I look at JD Vance in detail, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Wednesday, May the 14th, 2025. If you happen to enjoy this video, don't forget to like it. If you're not subscribed, feel free to subscribe. I would appreciate having you as a subscriber. So let's look at what's happening today. So here is the chart for today, set for noon, New York time. And moon is still in Sagittarius, in the middle of Sagittarius. So it doesn't matter where you are in the world, the moon is going to be in Sagittarius, all day long. And the moon is making a trine to Venus and a trine to Mars. So today we really do have a grand trine in fire signs. Now, this grand trine, might be exact earlier in the day if you're in the Americas, but still, wherever we are, I think we're going to feel the power of this grand trine. And I would have regarded this grand trine as, by and large, being pretty positive. It's in fire signs, it's very energetic, and the moon in Sagittarius is open and honest and also quite dynamic. And so it's picking up on a Venus-Mars trine. So Venus and Mars are moving towards a trine, and this trine aspect, it's not exact quite yet. And when is it exact, by the way? I keep forgetting. So the Venus-Mars trine is going to be exact. I make it on, looks like the 22nd of May. So it's going to be exact in just over a week. And yeah, the moon in Sagittarius is really picking up on it. And so it's as if the Venus-Mars trine is exact today because of the moon's influence, the moon moving from one to the other. So it can be an exciting, fun day, and with Venus and Mars involved, that might suggest that it could be a day that is good for relationships, that people can get on with each other. And it's a trine between Venus and Mars. Venus and Mars, these two male and female planets, are working well together, and maybe you could say they're working too well together. I mean, that is one problem with a grand trine. Grand trines, things can be a little bit too easy. So you start something, and once you start, well, it just keeps going. And so it might be that certain relationships get out of hand, but I think in most cases, things should be fine. And it is a day for projecting oneself in a positive and optimistic way. So that trine between the moon and Venus and Mars, those two trines, is probably the main thing going on. But we shouldn't forget the fact that there is a semi-sextile between the Sun and Jupiter In fact, we have got almost a semi-sextile between the Sun and Chiron. So tomorrow there'll be a semi-sextile between Sun and Chiron. And so the Sun is actually on the Jupiter-Chiron midpoint. But talking about Sun semi-sextile Jupiter and what that is about, a semi-sextile is not an easy aspect, because if you've got two planets in semi-sextile, you've got two signs that are very, very dissimilar to one another. Taurus and Gemini. Taurus and Gemini are different. Sun in Taurus plays Jupiter in Gemini. Sun in Taurus is looking for constancy. It's a fixed sign. It's an earth sign. It wants stability. It doesn't want too many surprises. Jupiter in Gemini is going all over the place. And so the challenge with Sun semi-sextile Jupiter is to hold firm to what we believe in, to have a plan of action, but also to take into account change. And if things happen we weren't expecting, if we have to deal with suggestions that we weren't properly prepared for, we have to have that flexibility to deal with it all. But at the same time, we mustn't forget fundamentally where we are going. So the Sun semi-sextile Jupiter is not quite like a square or an opposition, but a semi-sextile represents two principles that have to be incorporated with one another. They can be incorporated, but it may not necessarily be easy. So keep going in the same direction, but listen and be prepared to be flexible and be prepared to consider other ideas, but not to the extent where you lose track of where you're going. You've got to keep moving in the same direction, but there are different ways of getting from A to B, and Jupiter and Gemini might remind you that there could be a different approach. So that's the picture for New York, set for noon. If we look at the chart for Sydney, again set for noon on May the 14th, it is a little bit different. The moon is earlier in the sign, but moon is still in Sagittarius. Moon is still making a trine to Venus and Mars. In fact, I would have said that Grand Trine in fire signs is probably going to be stronger if you're in Australia and New Zealand and East Asia, Kamchatka, that part of the world, simply because it's going to be more exact during the active part of the day. If in the Americas, you might have to try a little bit harder to harness that Grand Trine in fire signs, but in Australia and New Zealand, it's going to be much more immediate. And then there is the heliocentric view. So these are the positions of the planets from the Sun's perspective. And one thing we should be aware of is that Jupiter and Neptune are getting very, very close now to the square. I think that today is probably the day of exactitude for the Jupiter-Neptune square, and there's Jupiter making the square to Neptune, and so this aspect it is heliocentric. So heliocentric does mean it's not particularly personal, and it says more about what people are thinking about down here on Earth, and there may be a lot of hope around, a belief that things are sorting themselves out, are resolving. And I think that is a hope. And I think in some respects, someone like Donald Trump represents that hope. Him believing he could solve the Ukraine problem in 5 minutes, and that kind of hope that things are going to get better. I don't quite know what's happening with these supposed talks in Istanbul, which are supposed to happen on Thursday. I thought that, I think the general view is they're not going to happen, or they're not going to happen in any meaningful way. But, that's an example of hope. People are hoping that you can get peace. In Turkey, I think that one of the Kurdish groups has just decided to end its struggle. I mean, maybe that's real. I mean, I don't know anything about Turkish politics, but a reduction in conflict, and it would seem to be a good thing. And then you've got the perennial problem of Gaza and India. So there may be and tariffs, of course. So with Jupiter square Neptune, it may just be that there is an atmosphere of optimism, an optimism that may not be grounded in reality. There could be a huge amount of wishful thinking with this Jupiter square Neptune, and it's sort of maybe permeating the world in which we live, because this is a heliocentric chart, but it's not necessarily individual over optimism. It's more collective over optimism, and the people who are best able to express collective optimism or collective over optimism would be politicians. People like Trump. So that's something that really does have to be pointed out. And Venus is still making a square to Saturn, heliocentrically, and it's actually starting to make a square to Neptune, and it's an opposition to Jupiter. So it's actually picking up on the Jupiter-Neptune opposition. So over the next day or two, we've got a T-square with Saturn and Neptune on the T, and that there is the growing power of a Venus-Jupiter opposition. So it really is about something potentially being taken too far. And Venus is a benefic, so don't necessarily believe what people say. I mean, you've got to be optimistic. I mean, you've got to hope, but you don't want to be naive. And I think that is a possible danger with Venus moving towards an opposition of Jupiter. People taking things too far, assuming that everything is going to work out, and then if it doesn't work out, getting rather annoyed about it. So that's the main thing going on heliocentrically, and we should not forget that Mars is starting to move towards an opposition of Saturn. It's not quite there yet, but it's getting closer. It's less than 6 degrees away, and we will monitor this Mars-Saturn opposition as it comes into being. And of course, when Mars moves opposition Saturn, it will then move towards an opposition of Neptune. So that's the heliocentric picture, and now it's time to consider the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Wednesday, May the 14th, 2025. Aries, things are moving. I think they're moving pretty quickly, and you may feel very, very energized and feeling that finally things are happening, and you're able to move beyond things that in the past had been holding you back, and you're very much aware of possibilities, and you do not want to be restricted or restrained. And I think in most cases you can treat other people in the same kind of way. You don't want to be restricted or restrained, but you don't want other people to be restricted and restrained. So there may be something about you that's really quite sort of free and easy, and you can just sort of allow things to develop as you feel fit. And from a relationship view, I think that today really could be very good with this Grand Trine in fire signs, with Moon Trine Mars, Moon Trine Venus. Venus and Mars are the two relationship planets, and Mars is of course your ruler, Venus is ruler of Libra, your opposite sign. The moon brings them together. So relationships can exceed your expectations. I mean, I don't know what your expectations are like. It depends from one Aries to another, but you've got to give other people a chance. And it's a time when you and other people can have an impression on each other. And the key thing is to have variety and not necessarily to relate to people in the same old way. The same old way has maybe got rather boring. And if you can be aware of possibilities, and perhaps you and someone else can do something different, that would be a very good way of making the most of this Grand Trine in fire signs. Though I don't want to indicate that you are being entirely sort of frivolous or trivial and you're just all about action and there's no reflection. It's not like that. I do think that there is a reflective side to you. With the moon in Sagittarius, many Arians are thinking about the future and where things are going, and you're not completely blind to the problems around you, the problems of society, the problems that might be unfolding in the economy. And I know that over the last couple of days the stock market has been up quite a lot, and that of course reflects progress that the US and China have been making with tariffs. And you're asking, well, what's this got to do with Aries? Well, what's it got to do with Aries? Well, at the moment, Aries, I do think that you're quite well aware of things going on in the world and business cycles and how the economy is going and how it might affect you in the future. And you may then be able to see this future and be thinking about how this future is going to have an impact on you. And it's also possible at the moment, with a lot of fire signs, we do have, with a lot of planets in fire signs, remember we've got Venus, Mars, the Moon, and Neptune in fire signs, that you can see things that other people can't. You know how it all fits together, and you can almost see the future developing. You see the signs, and it's not something that you have to think about. You just know. And so if you have an intuition about the future and how it relates to you, then I would suggest that you consider acting on this intuition, because you have an opportunity to, not just safeguard yourself, but to find a new area of growth and development for yourself. There's something that you want to do, you can do, and you can do it well, and you can perhaps be rewarded for it. And it has something to do with what's happening around us. It's to do with the way the world is changing. We often regard change as being a problem, as who knows what change is going to do. Change might make us irrelevant, but change can actually bring us into the limelight. It can make us super relevant, and I think it can make Aries really relevant to the world as it is developing. So don't be afraid of the future. In fact, it's a time to very much embrace it. Taurus, you at the moment have quite powerful feelings. You do take things seriously, and you know that there are a few things out there that can be trivialized. It is a serious business, and if you regard everything as a serious business, well, okay, that might slow you down. You might be wary of what is going to happen next. And so Taurus, there could be a degree of caution today, and I think it's a caution that is, born of your own good sense and also of your own perceptiveness. And you can certainly see how things could go wrong, but that's not just what today is about. Remember, there is a Grand Trine in fire signs, and the moon is making a trine to Venus, it's making a trine to Mars, and of course Venus is your ruler. And so, with this Grand Trine in fire signs, it really does bring together emotion and intuition. And they're two separate things, as I do sometimes say in these videos. They shouldn't be mixed up. Emotion is, it's the way we feel. Intuition is about realization. It's about seeing the big picture, and you can bring them together. So it's like you've got several sources for your realizations. In a sense, you've got a rational source, and you have got a rational source which is just the way you feel. I mean, that is rational. Feelings have their own rationality. I mean, feelings don't come from nowhere. It's just quite obvious. And then the sort of irrational side of things is just a realization that doesn't actually make any sense. You don't quite know why, but you just know it. And so you're in a position, Taurus, to just understand what's happening. And you don't have to go out there and ask questions. You don't have to look it up on the internet. There are things you just know, you just feel, and it's all very, very clear. And from a relationship view, the moon in Sagittarius is making trines to Venus and Mars, and these trines can really facilitate relationships. They can bring you and someone else closer together, and it can be about mutual understanding. I mean, okay, it might be one-way understanding. I mean, you have the understanding, and you're able to understand another person, like never before with this Grand Trine and fire signs. So if you have a feeling or an intuition about another person, it's very likely that your intuition is going to be correct. And so you can probably trust yourself to make the right decisions, and also trust yourself to accurately evaluate another person's motivations and character. And although, Taurus, you have a certain caution to you today, you might feel you don't want to take risks. It is a dangerous world out there. Things can happen. In spite of that, you are able to take decisive action if needed. And so if you feel that something needs to be done, your sense of timing may actually be very good, and you're able to make an intervention at exactly the right time. And you might not be entirely confident about what you're doing, but you just know it's the right thing to do. And so your intervention, will get noticed. It can change things. Yeah, it may have its own drama, but I think you'll get it right. And part of the reason you'll get it right is because you'll have a good understanding of other people, and you'll know what you can get away with. So if that opportunity comes about, the opportunity for taking dramatic and fortunate action, well, I think it's going to be fortunate action, then do avail yourself of this opportunity, because I don't think you'll regret it. Gemini, the moon continues moving through Sagittarius, your opposite sign, and so with the moon moving through Sagittarius, you may feel that it's a time when you have to take into account other people. Other people cannot be avoided. They can't be ignored. They are going to have some impact on you. And it can be quite a powerful impact because of this Grand Trine in fire signs. So, Gemini obviously is not a fire sign, and sometimes you can spend too much time thinking and not enough time acting. And so this Grand Trine in fire signs can actually be very motivating. And the motivation is coming from the outside. It's about you being pushed by others into taking a particular action. And the excitement also comes from outside. Gemini on its own can be just too wrapped up in its thoughts and its ideas, and sometimes it needs some external excitement, something almost explosive to happen to sort of move you to the next stage. And so, let other people work their magic and give you the inspiration you need. And once you get that inspiration, once things have started, then you'll really be able to get into the swing of things. At least that is a possibility. But it kind of depends on you, and it depends on how seriously you want to take things. Now, Gemini might have a reputation for not being a serious sign sometimes. Geminis can enjoy trivia, and they can enjoy gossip, and they can like to change the subject. But today, there is an underlying seriousness to you. You feel that something is in a state of struggle, and one reason for this is that actually we have a T-square going on, which affects Mercury, which is Mercury, your ruler. Now, I didn't point this out when I was just doing my introduction to the main events astrologically today, but if you look at what's going on, we have an opposition between Mars and Pluto. And this Mars and Pluto opposition is really wide. I mean, it's nearly 9 degrees out. So you could say that this Mars-Pluto opposition has completely lost its power, and it's something from the past. But it's being brought back into focus by Mercury, which is your sign. And you can see this. Mercury is in Taurus, and Mercury is at 4 degrees Taurus. Sorry, 7 degrees Taurus. So it's about 3 or 4 degrees away from the square of Pluto, and Mercury is about 4 degrees away from the square of Mars. So Mercury is halfway between making the square to Mars and making the square to Pluto. Or you could say Mercury's on the Mars-Pluto midpoint. And this gives us a completely different view. And it might indicate that there is something you are taking really, really seriously, and you want to give it everything. And it might even feel itself to be, a matter of life and death. Okay, I'm exaggerating, but it just feels important. And it's something that you want to throw all your energy into, and you don't want to be distracted. So it's not really a very Gemini-like aspect. It's actually quite intense, and it's got a single focus. Now, is that a good thing? It might be a good thing, provided you're focusing on the right on something that is the right thing, but also focusing on something that is healthy and life affirming. And So, where are your obsessions today? What are you getting obsessed about? What do you feel is your number one priority? And that's the question you should be asking yourself. And if that obsession is okay for you, if it feels healthy, I mean, obsessions can be healthy, can't they? You decide something really matters. So, if you've got a healthy obsession, then just go for it. Give it everything you've got. I don't think it need take up your whole day. As I've already said, other people are there for you, and other people are perhaps providing a balance. So other people are there. They're there to provide excitement. Relationships can give you a great deal. They can give you inspiration. They can give you the spark you're needing. And that's all very well. But there's still something you might feel that you have to do on your own. And it might relate to something that at the moment you might be you might be quite obsessed about. And the question is it a healthy obsession, or is it something that is really self-destructive? It could be self-destructive, but let's be optimistic. I think if you think something is important, then you should probably give it everything you've got. Cancer, things are moving. At first, you may have your doubts. Maybe things are moving too quickly. You might like things to slow down, and you can slow things down. You don't have to be pushed into doing anything. You can do things your way, and that doesn't mean to say that you have to ignore or cut yourself off from what's happening out there. Because it is a high energy day. With this Grand Trine in fire signs, Moon trine Venus, Moon trine Mars. Of course, Venus is starting to move towards a trine of Mars, and you pick up on it all. And this might mean that you can actually, if you so wish, come over as being an exciting and dynamic person. That's what people need at the moment. And one shouldn't forget with Cancer, although one does often forget it, that Cancer is a cardinal sign. The cardinal signs are about taking the initiative, the first move. And that's the way it works: cardinal, fixed, mutable. Cardinality is about making that first move. Fixity is about stabilizing that move, and then mutability is about developing it further with confidence, ideally in a perfect world. But you do have the ability to start things off, and with this Grand Trine and fire signs, you can be an initiator. What is it you want to initiate? And it may be a situation where the person who initiates first is the one who gets their way. I've noticed this when sort of looking at city council meetings. When there is a discussion about something, the one councillor had this particular technique for getting his way. He would start the discussion off. He would make the suggestion. He would give his opinions, and so that would mean that everyone else had to respond to him. And in the end, he would tend to get his way. And so maybe you should take that approach and make it your own. So if there is a discussion, if people are working out what to do next, then you should be the one that comes up with the first idea and then elaborate on it. Be strong about it, and then people have to respond to you. They might disagree with you, but they still have to respond to you. They still have to say why they disagree with you. And that might mean that you really can get your way, and you can get your way in many areas. But if you have a particular idea about the way things should be set up and organized, then be clear about it. And you'll have some good reasons, and it will seem to most people pretty obvious. And that may say something about your home and how you organize things at home, or it could be about your work, or it could be something else. So, take advantage of what's going on. Take advantage of the fact that the moon is in Sagittarius, and don't feel that it's all too much for you, because it is a high energy day, and your first instinct might be to feel that you don't want to get involved. It's just too much. But if you become part of a flow and you're able to make suggestions, then in many cases you really can get your way. And additionally, the moon is making a trine to Venus. It's making a trine to Mars, and it was making a trine to Venus and Mars yesterday. But as I said to some of the signs yesterday, Tuesday and Wednesday are continuations of each other. I don't think that Tuesday and Wednesday are discrete days when they are completely separate from one another. And this Grand Trine involving Venus and Mars really should facilitate your relations with other people. You can really get on with them for whatever reason, and it might be quite practical. So if other people are needed for you to get your way, whatever it is you want, I think there are things you want. I mean, there are things you should be wanting, because because of this Grand Trine, and then you just have to ask. So, in fact, Cancer, you're in quite a strong position today. But I just have this concern that you might not think you're in a strong position. You might feel that it's all, a little bit too much, and it's something you don't want to be involved in. It's too much energy. But if you actually embrace this energy, become part of this energy, become the center of it all, and actually use it to get your way, then you'll be quite surprised at what you can actually achieve. So if you really seize the day, then it could actually be quite amazing. Leo, the sun is your ruler, and the sun is making a semi-sextile to Jupiter. Now, a semi-sextile is quite a minor aspect. It's an aspect that is sometimes ignored, but for you, I think it is important, especially because the sun is also making a semi-sextile to Chiron. So, in fact, that means that you've got a Chiron Jupiter sextile, and you've got the sun in the middle of that sextile. In other words, the sun is on the Jupiter Chiron midpoint, and I think it will be tomorrow as well. So let's just think about what that means. The sun in Taurus represents you trying to do something. You are quite focused, I hope. You should be, with the sun in Taurus. Sun is your ruler. Taurus is a fixed sign. There are things you want to get going on, and it may be going well. I hope it's going well. But then the semi-sextile to Jupiter comes along, and Jupiter represents an alternative view. An alternative view that at first sight you don't really want to bother with, because it's just an extra complication and it's just wasting time. But if you get an alternative view, and this alternative view could well come from another person or even a group of people, could be friends, colleagues, associates, someone just suggests something to you, or even does something that you don't necessarily approve of, and it seems to compromise everything that you're trying to achieve. And there's a danger that you're defensive. You see a possibility of losing everything, of getting lost because something is too complicated. You have to deal with a new idea, and you somehow have to resist the temptation to be overly negative. I think you're going to want to be negative. You're going to want to pretend that everything is fine. That's your first reaction. I mean, everything might be fine. I really think it probably will be fine, but things could be even better if you were to pay a little bit of attention to what's happening outside and what other people are saying. And maybe with the Sun semi-sextile Jupiter, you've been looking at things in a very single-minded way. You have perhaps just been thinking about what is expedient, what you want, what your ambitions are. And it's all rather one-dimensional and perhaps even a little bit materialistic, too materialistic. And you haven't actually thought about the larger picture, and you haven't thought about the wider future. And maybe that's what Jupiter is telling you about. You've got to think about where it all fits in. And yes, you might achieve one of your goals. You might achieve your main goals. You might be very close to achieving it. But then what? And that's what Jupiter is asking, perhaps. Then what? But you now have an opportunity to really bring things together and to understand the future and to be able to prepare for the future. And you shouldn't ignore what other people say. You can ignore in the end what they say. You don't have to follow anyone's advice, but there is a different perspective, and I think it would be a good idea if you were to just at least be aware of it. And while all this is going on, there is a Grand Trine in fire signs, and Leo being a fire sign, you should be welcoming this kind of event. And this Grand Trine involves Mars, which is moving through your sign. Yeah, Mars is still in Leo. Mars doesn't move into Virgo until... Well, when does Mars move into Virgo? Mars moves into Virgo in June. Is it June June the 17th? So Mars is still very much in Leo, and so this Grand Trine is energizing, and it allows you to really harness your fire. And so perhaps this also links with the Sun semi-sextile Jupiter. If you allow your intuition to flow, if you just listen to what another person suggests, you don't have to listen even very hard. It will suddenly make sense. And so sometimes your intuition is telling you something that you hadn't actually realized, and your first instinct is to just do nothing and to ignore your intuition. But it's not a day for ignoring your intuition, because you're being told something, and it's not a time to turn away from the truth. The truth is there. It's right in front of you. So really, it can be an excellent day. It's a day when you can be completely informed about what's happening, and your next step should be very obvious, and you can be helped by other people. And also, it being a Grand Trine in fire signs, you can have an enormous sense of vitality and power, and a sense that you're really enjoying what you're doing, and that you are in the center of things. So, Leo, it can be a great day, and it's just important that you're not too fixed in terms of how you perceive your goals. You broadly understand where you're going, but there may just be something else you haven't considered, and once you start considering it, then there'll be a great sense of completion and just a feeling that really things really are moving, and you are moving in the right direction. Virgo, it's an interesting day, and it's a day when there may be a number of different pressures. One pressure might be to just stay where you are. Your family might have some relevance. The moon is in Sagittarius. Sagittarius is a very introspective, personal part of your chart, and it's a sign that is often connected in the Virgo horoscope with home and family. So that might be where your main focus is, or where you would like your main focus to be. But just because the moon is in a low profile sector of your chart, doesn't mean that things are boring. The moon is making a trine to Venus, it's making a trine to Mars, and so where the home is where the action is, and the hearth fires are burning bright, and you can feel a sense of real sort of oneness and satisfaction when you're at home. And so this might mean that you don't really have to put yourself out, at least in terms of, for example, traveling to somewhere different, or spending all your time worrying about what society is expecting of you. It's all there. It's all there where you are, and I don't think that you have to move around very much. Yet there is another aspect going on which may be quite important, and that involves Mercury. Mercury, for you, it's your ruler, and Mercury is in Taurus, and so at the moment with Mercury in Taurus, many Virgons are trying to think about what they should be doing in quite an inspirational way. I mean, Mercury in Taurus has a spirituality to it. It's not enough just to be doing something because you're concerned about short-term benefits. You've got to think about perspective, and also, what do you actually believe in? And beliefs could be important with Mercury in Taurus, and also, of course, the Sun is in Taurus as well. So your beliefs may be crystallizing, and Mercury recently made a square to Pluto, and it is about to make a square to Mars. So what's actually happening is that Mercury is in a halfway point. It's halfway between making a square to Pluto and making a square to Mars. Now, one way of perceiving that is to say, well, Mercury is on the Mars-Pluto midpoint. And so that Mars-Pluto opposition, which we thought we were done with, is now coming back into focus, and at least it is for you. And so Mars-Pluto is, as a pair, are really quite focused, quite intense, quite single-pointed, actually. And it could be, Virgo, that there's something quite intense about today. You start to think about one thing, and that one thing may almost take you over. and you want to keep going until you've resolved it. And it might relate to what you believe in. And I think that if you come across something that is an affront to what you believe in, then you might want to do something about it. And you could also be quite judgmental with Mercury on the Mars-Pluto midpoint. If something is not in accord with your values, then you may feel that you have to do something about it. You might even have to say something about it. And I'm not convinced that that's entirely wise. Instead, Virgo, you should maybe see this as a time when you can start to develop your beliefs even further, based on your emotional reactions and also based on the evidence. And it's not a time, I don't think, to be out there in the world making a name for yourself, making a fuss. Not today. It's better if you restrict your activities to places and people that you know and trust, and you can sort of develop things in your own way, in your quiet, secluded world. Okay, your family shouldn't be ignored, but you don't have to be out and about, and you need time and space to really work on the insights that you're getting. And there could be something quite passionate about today, and when you get passionate about something, it makes you realize that you've got to stick with it. And so it's okay to be passionate, provided you don't get destructively passionate. Libra, the moon is moving through Sagittarius, and with the moon moving through Sagittarius, making a trine to Venus, it's also making a trine to Mars. I think that your ability to be yourself and to express your views is going to be pretty good, and there's going to be something about you at the moment which is fairly spontaneous. You can just move from one concept to another, one subject to another. You can discuss most things. You don't need to have expert knowledge. The words will flow, and you will benefit from the fact that there is a Grand Trine in fire signs. I mean, the moon in Sagittarius doesn't just make a trine to Venus, it also makes a trine to Mars. And so there is a sense of excitement about the way you communicate, and people will listen to what you say. And through the power of your words, you have an opportunity to bring people together. And in some cases, you might be the excitement that some people are looking for. And Libra as a sign, okay, it's an air sign, but you can be quite fiery today, because of this Grand Trine. And you shouldn't forget that Venus is in Aries, so Venus is your ruler. It's in Aries, it's in a fire sign, and so you should be going where the action is, within reason. I'm not talking about sort of dangerous actions, looking for accidents and mishaps. That's not really what it's about. But you are looking for something. You feel that action is necessary, and well, if there's no action in your life, if that's the case, then you're going to want to go wherever the action lies. So that can be actually quite a Libran trait. Libra being an air sign sometimes needs that fire to get things going. But that fire is available, and that fire might come from you, and it might come from other people. Don't forget that Venus is in Aries; it's in your opposite sign. And it's trine Mars, and moon is making a trine to Venus, trine to Mars. So if you need extra excitement, I think that other people are going to be available. And you shouldn't underestimate other people. You have an opportunity to get in touch with fun, exciting people who can just help move you along and move you along to the next stage and to something which is fun and which is sparking with energy. But as I've already suggested, you are able yourself to make things happen. You shouldn't feel that it's always down to other people, or that you just have to respond. Right now, you have the ability to have a real impact on your environment. And you can do it quite suddenly and unexpectedly. You don't have to announce yourself. You don't have to give warnings. You just do it. And it may well be the case, Libra, that if you want to be really effective today, you give yourself the element of surprise. If no one's expecting you to do something or say something, then your impact could actually be quite massive. And I don't think people will mind, because with this Grand Trine and fire signs, people are looking for excitement, and you're someone who can actually provide this excitement. Scorpio, you are quite sensible in your own way. I mean, of the 12 signs, you're probably at the moment one of the more sensible of these signs, and you have an understanding of your limitations and also of your responsibilities. There are certainly things you want to get going on. There are things you want to do, and as far as you're concerned, it has to be done in a fairly slow and methodical way. At least that's how you'd like it to be. But sometimes things move quite quickly, and if you do apply yourself to anything, don't be surprised if it all comes together quicker than expected. And when things start moving quickly, you might get bothered. You might be worried that you might lose control of things, and that is often an issue with Scorpios. Scorpios do want to be in control, and when things are going too fast, you might be tempted to panic, but there's no need to panic. I think that maybe, Scorpio, you're expecting things to move in a sort of a slow and methodical way, yes, but maybe your expectations could actually be holding you back. Maybe you should expect more, and within reason, the faster things are going, the better. And additionally, when we actually look at what's happening, the moon is making a trine to Mars, and it's making a trine to Venus. Mars is your ruler, and so with moon trine Mars, moon trine Venus, with this Grand Trine and fire signs, you really can achieve a lot. And it's just important that you have some idea of what you want to achieve. So think about some of your goals, some of your ambitions, and ask yourself, to what extent can they actually be realized or start to be realized today? It might feel like a quiet Wednesday, but you don't want it to be too quiet, and maybe you can actually achieve more than expected today. And so that would gravitate towards an early start and really try to pack in as much as possible today, because you really can, I think, cover a great deal of ground. And additionally, Scorpio, your intuition is going to be on very good form. You're just going to have a sense for the way things are going. I'm not talking about just what's happening in your life, but what's happening in other people's lives and in the lives of the society the life of the society in which you exist. And you just get a feeling, where it's going. You can actually cut through both other people's pessimism and optimism. In some places, people are over-optimistic. They think, oh, everything's going to be great. In some other places, they're totally pessimistic, and they have good reasons for thinking it's all going to be a disaster. But you're able to get the balance right, Scorpio, and you do kind of know how it's going to end up, especially in a material sense. And this might mean that right now you're going to be very good at evaluating, plans and ideas. Not just your own plans and ideas, but maybe other people's plans and ideas. So if someone tells you that they're going to do something, you might just know immediately whether or not it's going to work. And it could be a time, Scorpio, where you have to be honest. Perhaps brutally honest. If you are brutally honest, okay, not everyone will appreciate it, but you are at least telling someone how it's in the end going to work. They could ignore you if they want, but I think people who ignore you and your advice today will live to regret it. Sagittarius. Sagittarius, it really seems as if things are moving, because the moon is not just in Sagittarius, in your sign, but it's also making a trine aspects to Venus and Mars. And so with this Grand Trine and fire signs, you really are motivated, and you feel that you're at home, that it's your world. You don't have to strive, you don't have to struggle, because you have arrived. And so it's important, Sagittarius, that you really pack in as much as possible today. And ideally you will start early today. These grand trines involving the moon, moon, Venus, Mars, they could actually happen relatively early in the day if you're in the Americas. And so if you don't start your day until 3 p.m., then a lot of that energy will be starting to fade. So if possible, certainly if you're in the Americas, really do try to have an early start. And so keep moving. Ideally, don't restrict yourself to any one thing. You don't have a fixed plan, because the problem about having a fixed plan today is that by having a fixed plan, you'd be perhaps denying yourself so many opportunities, because there is just so much going on, and you just need to be aware of it all. And so, be open-minded and try to do several things today. Try, if you're planning today, try not to spend all your time in one place, because that could be a waste. Try to have 2 or 3 different activities, 2 or 3 different areas of operation, and in that way, I do think that things can really move, and you don't always have to announce yourself, and you can just turn up when you're least expected, and through your sudden arrivals, you can maybe catch people unawares, but they'll be pleased to see you, and they'll find your presence exciting, and there can even be a feeling of drama today, and you can be the one who can be dramatic, and do something that no one's expecting, and it will be appreciated. This is especially the case if you feel that something needs to happen, if you feel that things aren't moving fast enough, or that something is going in the wrong direction. Your intervention can actually make a huge difference. So really, don't hold back. Now, one aspect we've got aside from the Grand Trine is a semi-sextile between the Sun and Jupiter. So that means that Jupiter is your ruler, and Jupiter is how you're expressing yourself, then it makes a semi-sextile to the Sun, or rather the Sun makes a semi-sextile to Jupiter. So it's true that today can be exciting, that you should make it as busy as possible, but give yourself as much variety as possible. But that Sun sextile Jupiter indicates that you still need to have a little bit of discipline and a little bit of focus, because we've got the Sun in Taurus making a semi-sextile to Jupiter. Sun in Taurus has a certain sense of constancy and stability, and it likes to perhaps be properly organized. Now, you don't want to spend all day organizing yourself. Organization would destroy the day. Yet a little bit of planning and a little bit of awareness of the importance of timing and a little bit of structure as well just could make the difference. So don't be completely chaotic, and do perhaps be aware of the need to do things properly, but not too properly. So that Sun sextile Jupiter is a difficult balance to do, because what you don't want with Sun semi-sextile Jupiter is you to be dragged down by the Taurus principle. Taurus can just be about, let's just do the same thing in the same old way, and you're aware of that drag on you, and it may be about your reservations. It probably is about your reservations. Not all of who you are completely wants to get involved with this Grand Trine in fire, but you have to really make the most of it, but just be a little bit aware of the need for constancy, but you don't want too much constancy. So just have a little bit of grounding, but you don't want too much grounding, because if you have too much grounding, well, that could spoil everything, and you could be stuck in one place and you could feel very frustrated when all this action is going on. But if you have to take one thing away from today, it is an action-packed day. And if you are able to pack in as much as possible, I don't think that you'll be disappointed. Capricorn, you are aware that things are happening. There is a Grand Trine in fire signs, which I've been going on and on about. I regard this as being, quite an important event. But the question is, how does it impact you? You may feel that really there's too much going on, and it can be difficult to keep track of it all. And you don't have to be part of something that you don't want to be. So if you want to be separate from things, if you want to make your excuses and do something else, that's okay. And it may be that you'll just regard other people's behavior and other people's reactions as being just annoying, and you may just have to let them get on with it. So what I'm really saying is that this Grand Trine and fire signs, although it's very real, it may not affect you, or you may not want it to affect you. And so you may just prefer to just ignore it and do something else, and even perhaps just have a quiet day when you do your own thing. And if other people are having fun, well, that's fine, but it needn't bother you. And additionally, Capricorn, there could be something about you right now that is quite intense. There are things that you really want to think about, and you want to think about them very deeply, and they're important to you. And that is another reason why you might not want to be distracted. you feel, you feel that things are complicated enough. You've got things on your plate, and let's focus on what matters. And if anyone gets in your way or disturbs your concentration, you're capable of actually being quite forceful. So you shouldn't feel that whatever's going on today is compromising you, because you are well able to look after yourself. And so it just may be just a quiet day, and that might be really all there is to say. Though try to give some consideration to other people. There is this Grand Trine in fire signs, which I don't think directly impacts you, but some of the people around you may be wrapped up in this Grand Trine, and they may be in the mood for action, and you have to be sympathetic to this. So if people want things to happen, then don't just tell them, oh, they can't do that, or that you've got something else to do, and you don't want to give them any much in the way of enthusiasm. Perhaps because you're just unenthusiastic about what other people are trying to do. So perhaps, Capricorn, there may be a place for just going through the motions, giving people a little bit of encouragement, because that's what they want. Just a bit of positivity on your part, might just make things easier, might create a harmonious environment. And otherwise you don't want people to feel that you're unsupportive. You're always supportive, and it's just that right now you might not fully be sympathetic with what's happening around you. And if you do feel unsympathetic to it, do you want other people to pick up on this lack of sympathy? I think you probably don't. Aquarius. You could say that today is a continuation of yesterday. So, Tuesday, Wednesday, it's the same action. And, the moon is in Sagittarius. It was in Sagittarius yesterday. Yesterday, the moon was starting to make a Grand Trine in fire signs, because the moon was trine Venus, trine Mars, and that Grand Trine involving Moon, Venus, and Mars is still very much in evidence. And I think for most of us, that Grand Trine is going to be stronger today than it was yesterday. And this Grand Trine in fire signs for you could actually be pretty sociable. It does relate to other people and how you respond to other people. And so, if possible, you should be as, sociable as you can be. Try to, if possible, be where the action is. And, don't think that you have to do everything on your own. You might like to do everything on your own. I think that there is an inclination to feel that you want to be in control, you want to have the power, and if you are involved with other people, you're working in a team or in a partnership, you might lose some of that power. There is that inclination, but I think if you want to really make the most of today, then it would be best if you really make an effort to see what other people have got to offer, because I think that they've got a considerable amount to offer. And in a social sense, you have the ability to make things happen, even if to begin with you're not in the mood. And I think to begin with you're probably not in the mood. You probably would prefer just to do things your own way, do things your own way in your own space, and not to be too much of an extrovert. But if you do make an effort in your social life, and you try to really understand what other people are doing, what other people want, and if you try to be encouraging, then I think that you're going to be in a position to really make things move. And even people who in the past had not been sympathetic or you hadn't particularly liked, they may show a new side to their personality if you give them a chance. Yet it can't be denied that there is something about you today that is quite serious. And it may be to do with the fact that we have a T-square involving Uranus, Mars and Mercury. It is a T-square because, we've had this Mars-Pluto opposition, which has been across the main axis of your chart, and you have probably felt that its influence has been dissipating because Mars has been moving away from the opposition of Pluto. But what's happening now is that Mercury is making a square to Pluto and it's making a square to Mars. So Mercury has recently made a square to Pluto and it's now applying to a square to Mars. So Mercury is halfway between the square of Mars, square of Pluto. And so Mercury is the planet of thinking and of ideas and thoughts. So you might be very sociable today. You might be trying your hardest to be sociable, but at the same time, there is a lot of deep thinking, and you can't help but ask yourself, how is this going to work out? What are the power dynamics? And could you lose from a situation? Could you gain from it? So there is an inner dialogue going on. Now, however sociable, however easygoing you appear to be, this dialogue is going on, and it may have some influence on your external behavior, but ideally you would try to keep your thoughts and your actions separate. I know that doesn't sound like good advice. You're not supposed to split things off. That seems to be psychologically unhealthy. And people talk about, in philosophy and psychology, they talk about, the mind-body split. And maybe we've got some kind of split here that, you're acting in one way and you're thinking and feeling in another way. And no, should you keep the two separate? I think today you probably should, because you don't know where things are going. I think you've got a responsibility with other people. You can certainly benefit from other people, but at the same time, you don't know where it's leading, and you do have some serious thoughts. So you can get partly carried away with the Grand Trine in fire signs, but not entirely carried away, because you are thinking about things, and perhaps you're being a little bit suspicious, and you're questioning another person's motives. And it's okay to ask these questions. You can trust them in the short term. You can even have fun with them in the short term, but you don't know quite where it's all going to lead. And in general, Aquarius, in the end, you're going to be in control. So whatever you do, even if you are able to partake in other people's joy and excitement, you still have a feeling about what you need to do, and you are going to be in control. So don't worry about losing control, because you are in full control, and you're going to be in full control all day long. Pisces, it looks like being a day when you can certainly have an impact and you are able to make things happen. And if you want to pursue any of your ambitions, then I think you can. And you can do it in a way that is fairly spontaneous, but you're not going to lose your focus. And you are really going to be helped by the fact that we have a Grand Trine in fire signs, and this Grand Trine in fire signs is affecting all of us in different ways. As far as how it affects you, well, I think that this Grand Trine can be harnessed to further your own ambitions. The moon is in Sagittarius. For you, Pisces, moon in Sagittarius, it's the top of the chart. It can be about career, business, ego development. And so when the moon is trine Venus, trine Mars, that indicates that the force is with you. the energy of the universe can be put to work in such a way that you can really achieve whatever it is you want to achieve. And you can achieve things, not just through hard work or just through some heavy grind. It can be achieved quickly. So there may be moments, or even not just moments, there could be hours, days of inactivity and where nothing seems to be moving, and then suddenly there's action, and some of this action could actually happen today. So there's a possibility, if you're flexible and you make sure that you're in perhaps several different places over the course of the day, that there may be a sudden sense of relief that something gets resolved, something you've been trying to do for a long time. Suddenly there is movement, and it could just be that all your hard work starts to pay off, and it just happens. It happens very quickly. And don't forget about money. From a money view, we've got Venus in Aries, and Venus in Aries. Aries is a sign that in the Pisces chart can have a financial dimension to it. And so with Venus making a trine to Mars, Moon making a trine to Venus, Moon making a trine to Venus, it may be that for some Pisceans it's actually easier than usual to make money or to make progress with money. So if there's some financial issue that you've been holding back on, or you thought it wasn't working, well, there can be movement. And also, Pisces, it's important that you're not responsive. You don't want to just be waiting for something to happen. And if it doesn't happen, being disappointed. You are actually able to make things happen. You're able to actually act. And you're able to be quite dramatic about it. And this is especially the case if you feel things are not moving, things are a bit stuck. You can just suddenly decide you're going to tell the world who you are and what you want, and you may even want to give a time limit on it. Give me this by this date. It may even be a good time for Pisceans to deliver ultimatums if you feel that's really necessary. But I don't think in most cases it will be necessary. It's just you just need to be aware that you are in control, and if you're not getting what you want, then you can demand it. And if you demand something, then I somehow don't think that people are going to be particularly offended. They'll just say, okay, that's what Pisces wants, and there's a good chance that Pisces will achieve what it wants. So Pisces looks like being a very active day, and I hope that you're able to make the most of it. And now I want to switch to the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Wednesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram 64, which is before completion. So this gives us the idea that we're involved with something which is not yet finished. And when you're thinking about before completion, you could be thinking about rivers, crossing a river, and that's what we're trying to do. The river and that far bank, they are symbolic of a process. We're trying to get to the far bank. We have to cross this river, and it's a very big river. Maybe from a Chinese perspective, maybe it's a yellow river, and we're trying to cross it, and it's difficult to cross this river, and there's going to be a lot of drama on the way, and we might make mistakes. And if we make mistakes, then they could be catastrophic. One symbol that the I Ching likes to use is a fox crossing a river very carefully across the ice, but it mustn't get wet. If it gets wet, it could get dragged down. So we don't want to make mistakes, and we don't want to make mistakes halfway across. And so we have two moving lines, and the second line moves and the fourth line moves. And what the second line moving tells us is that we may need to stop at a certain stage. It talks about the breaking of wheels, break as in handbrake. We have to stop the cart moving, because otherwise we could get stuck in the mud. And so we have to be aware of that situation. And we might be in mud, but we are able to get out of this mud. So it's not a disastrous situation, but there might be a need to just pause what we're doing just for the moment, until we've understood what's happening. And then the fourth line moves, and the fourth line really is about action, and it talks about disciplining the devil's country. I mean, that's what the Wilhelm translation talks about. So the devil's country, it's a difficult place to be, and we're going to have to fight, and we in the end we're going to complete it. We're going to make it through, but it's not always going to be easy. But if we put in the effort, we will be successful, and indeed we will get to the other side. So that's the process of making a change, and it's quite a difficult change. And to begin with, we might have to pause. We might feel that we're not ready, but if we keep going, and we get the wheels out of the mud, and then we're really prepared to sort of struggle for what we believe in, then in the end, we can get to the far side. We can get to the other side of the bank. But then, what is the implications of making that transition? What does it actually mean? And so we do move to a second hexagram, which perhaps tells us. And what this moves to is hexagram number 23, which is splitting apart. Now, splitting apart on the surface is quite a difficult hexagram. It indicates that, things really are falling apart. I mean, you have a look at this hexagram. It looks pretty weak, doesn't it? So you've got this unbroken line at the top, but this structure is unstable, and the image can be of a piece of furniture where maybe the legs of a table or a chair are being eaten by termites, and the whole structure is about to fall apart. And this can be that the evil elements are supreme, and they're taking over everything. And what can we do? We just have to leave, and there's nothing we can do short term. So when we look at it in relation to the previous hexagram before completion, though, we get maybe a different image. Splitting apart before completion, we are trying to cross a river. We are trying to break free from something. We're trying to make a transition from a situation which we really don't find to be very satisfactory, splitting apart. And so this is perhaps telling us something about the consequences of our action. By crossing the river, we are breaking free from all of the sort of evil elements that are pursuing us, or rather a life that we weren't comfortable with, and we do make this transition. But of course, this is just a hexagram for one day, for Wednesday. So there's a limit to how dramatic it can be. So if you feel that there's something you're trying to get away from, it may be something very short term, then it's going to take some work. You're trying to cross that river, and you will get there in the end, and then you will split apart. And that's actually what you want to do. You make that split, and it's a split that I think in this case is very much for the good. And it's now time to look at JD Vance. I have looked at JD Vance before, but he is vice president, and as vice presidents go, he's probably fairly influential. He seems to have a strong personality, and many people are suggesting that he may be the next president. Of course, if anything happens to Donald, if he drops dead, for example, then JD Vance will immediately become president of the United States. So it's always important to keep track of what is happening with JD Vance. And I looked at JD Vance's horoscope just a couple of days ago when I was looking at the full moon, because I was of the opinion that this full moon could well have an impact on him. So looking at JD Vance's horoscope, JD Vance has his midheaven at 20 degrees 2 minutes Taurus. So he's got Taurus midheaven, and if we compare his full moon to, if we compare JD Vance to horoscope with the full moon chart, this full moon is exactly on JD Vance's midheaven. So what is the midheaven? What is the IC? The IC is opposite the midheaven. So it is how JD Vance perceives his future, his ambitions. What does he want to do with his life? Well, it looks as if at the moment he certainly wants to have political power. And maybe other things that he has in terms of his ambitions. But this full moon has, I think, really brought something home to him. I think that with this full moon, JD Vance, I think, realizes what it means to be vice president. There are great limitations in being vice president. More limitations than being just an ordinary senator. Senators have freedom to an extent, but if you're vice president, you're very much in the president's shadow, and he also has to be thinking about the future. He has to be thinking about his ambitions. I'm pretty sure he wants to be the next president, and there is a real possibility that could happen. Might be greater than 50%, greater than a 50% probability. Now, the thing about Vance is that Vance has his Mars on the IC, and so that Mars on the IC is in Scorpio. It's a really strong Mars, and so this full moon must have activated, a huge amount for Vance. We're not seeing it because it's Mars in Scorpio on the IC. Mars in Scorpio on the IC, I regard that as being quite private. Whatever he's thinking, whatever he's feeling, he may well be keeping it to himself. And so it's very difficult to know what he is experiencing. But I'm not convinced that JD Vance is feeling entirely happy in the wake of this full moon, and he may be feeling a little bit of frustration there. And this full moon doesn't just hit his Venus; it also hits his Mars. It also hits his Venus, because he's got a Venus-Mars square. And I think that he very much does have this Venus-Mars square, because Venus and Mars is, as a pairing, is about attraction and repulsion. I mean, some people think that JD Vance is completely wonderful. They think he's absolutely great. They're looking forward to him being the next president. Other people regard him as being abrasive, unpleasant, impulsive, and they can't stand him. So he does elicit strong feelings in the American electorate. I don't think that's going to make any difference in terms of the 2028 election. People who don't like him, well, they weren't going to vote for him anyway, were they? Possibly because they're Democrats. But he has, he does have this Venus-Mars square, and the full moon has completely triggered it. So, one does wonder, what has been going on in JD Vance's life, and so this full moon, really does matter. Now, there are people he has to interact with. I already talked about him and Donald Trump. So just to remind us that there is a fairly powerful connection between Trump and Vance. Trump has his ascendant pretty much at the same place as Vance's ascendant. Also, the midheaven is very similar. So this full moon was on Trump's midheaven and MCIC. So, well, technically it was on his IC, and it was also on Vance's IC. So I do think that this full moon has really highlighted the relationship between Trump and Vance. And Vance's Mars is on Trump's IC. And that is a dangerous piece of synastry. There is the possibility for Vance to annoy Trump. Okay, they've got on well so far, but how long is that going to go on for? Remember, these two people, they have Mars trine, Mars square Mars. Trump's Mars is square Vance's Mars, and the full moon was sort of picking up on this. So I'm just thinking that this full moon has opened up some fault lines between Trump and Vance. And it was suggested by Niles Glynn 8727 that I do consider some other people involved in the administration. Well, specifically one person, and that person is Marco Rubio. So why Marco Rubio? Why would one want to look at Marco Rubio? Well, Vance has opinions about foreign affairs, and he's actually had quite a high profile already with foreign affairs. Vance is not like Kamala Harris, who doesn't really say anything who never really said anything of great meaning. He's a much more definite politician. He's a much more active politician. One knows where Vance stands, and he has had some definite. He's had a definite impact, hasn't he? Well, he went to India quite recently. I think he got on pretty well with Modi. He met Giorgia Meloni in Rome. I thought they got on quite well. But on the other hand, he went to the Munich Security Conference and attacked the European Union, European leaders for being repressive. I think that, as far as I'm concerned, he was quite right to do that. I mean, with candidates being not allowed to stand. Talk about banning parties in Germany with the AfD. I think that what Vance did was very principled and very brave, and I think it had to be said. So he has had an impact. Of course, he went to Greenland, didn't he? As well. So Marco Rubio, he's Secretary of State, and so he is supposedly America's chief diplomat. And Marco Rubio has his Mars at 11 Aquarius, And that Mars at 11 Aquarius does have an impact on JD Vance. So here is JD Vance's horoscope in the middle and Marco Rubio on the outside wheel. So JD Vance has a Sun-Saturn square. Sun in Leo square Saturn in Scorpio. And that is quite an aggressive aspect, actually. Mars as a planet can be quite aggressive. Sorry, Saturn can make things more aggressive, but it may be out of frustration. There can be something quite abrasive about Saturn. And so Rubio's Mars at 11 Aquarius is opposition Vance's Sun at 10 degrees Leo. So there is quite possibly a clash of personality there. They don't necessarily get on. And additionally, Vance's Saturn is square Rubio's Mars. So I think it very likely that the two of them really have issues with each other. And in fact, it's worse than that, because Rubio has a Venus-Mars square. So there's Rubio's Venus, square Vance's Sun, and Vance's Saturn in Scorpio is opposition Rubio's Mercury and his Venus. So I think it's very likely that these two men quite possibly can't stand each other, and they may have very different views about foreign affairs, because from what I can see, that Vance he's not really a neocon, not like Rubio. I mean, Rubio seemed a kind of a bit of a strange choice for Secretary of State, but Rubio perhaps represents the status quo, the old way of doing foreign affairs. Maybe this is why Trump, certainly in terms of his approach to Ukraine, he's kind of looks as if he may be going back to the Biden approach. But there may be a clash in terms of foreign affairs between Rubio and Vance. It may just be a personality clash. And I was also asked to look, or it was suggested that I look at the horoscope of the European Union. Now, remember, Vance has criticized European countries for restricting freedom of speech, and worse, banning parties, or considering banning parties. Look at all these suggestions about the AfD in Germany. There was a time when they were going to declare it as an extreme right-wing party. Now they've delayed it, and of course, once you say it's an extreme right-wing party in Germany, then it starts to come under surveillance, and then at some stage it might get banned. So Vance has been critical of that, and here is the horoscope of the European Union for when the Treaty of Maastricht came into action, and so the European Union has a lot of stuff in Scorpio, and it has the moon at 24 Taurus, opposition Mars, opposition Mercury, and so Vance really hits the European Union. So Vance's Saturn is conjunct the European Union's Sun. His Mars is opposition the European Union's moon, and it's actually they've got a Mars conjunction. So the European Union as an entity has real problems with Vance, and Vance has real problems with the European Union, and this has all been brought out into the open by the full moon. And the full moon is the full moon that we had on Monday was opposition the European Union's moon. And don't forget that the European Union was born on a full moon, just about. The moon was just separating from an opposition of the sun in Scorpio, moon in Taurus. So again, one wonders how this full moon is working out. What is Vance saying to Trump? Is he keeping things private, or is he telling Trump about his feelings about the European Union and what's happening to democracy in the European Union? And so, what are his current sort of activities? What is he up to? And I was also thinking about what parts of the world does Vance have a real impact on? Where are the parts of the world that that Vance should be thinking about and being careful about? So here's Vance's chart. Now we could relocate Vance's chart to relocate it to London. So this might say something about Vance and his relationship with Britain as a country. This isn't just Britain under Starmer, it's just Britain in general. I mean, things will change if there's an election in that 2020, probably 2028, 2029. So there'll be an election around about the time of the presidential election in the UK. So as Trump leaves office, so will there be another election, and who knows what's going to happen. At the moment, everyone is saying that Nigel Farage could become prime minister. We don't know that. A lot can change in 4 years, and so in terms of Vance's relationship with the UK, if you recast Vance's chart for London, then the sun is on the midheaven, so his Saturn is square the midheaven. So that Sun-Saturn really comes into focus, and that may say something about Vance's relations with the UK, and those relations with the UK might become quite important, especially if he becomes president. But what I really wanted to look at was things going on, further east, and so if we do an astrocartography for Vance for Europe, so there's Europe, and what I'm really interested in with Vance is the Mars line, this yellow line here, and this. Let me move this up. Oh, maybe you can't see this. Let me move this on. Okay, I think you can now see the yellow line, can't you? Okay, this yeah. So this yellow line here, these are all the places where Mars is on the ascendant for Vance, and it actually goes through Moscow, so that's pretty close. It's even closer going through Kiev, and it goes through Bucharest and Greece. So it's kind of not surprising that Vance with Mars rising in Moscow and Ukraine, in Moscow and Kiev, has very strong opinions about what he says about strong opinions about the war between Russia and Ukraine, and he's already said stuff. I mean, he's said, oh, maybe Russia's asking for too much, but I think he's quite realistic about it. I think he's realistic about where it's going. He's not caught up in this globalist fantasy about Russia losing. He has his own views, but it's Mars rising, and so I think he's actually very concerned about the war in Ukraine, and Mars, he's possibly being quite sort of angry about it and being very clear about his opinions. And if you remember from his speech at the Munich Security Conference, he did criticize what was going on in Romania. In Romania, the man who got in first place was disqualified because he did too well. So the powers that be got rid of him, and he was even arrested at one stage. And so Vance pointed this out, and Vance has his Mars going through Bucharest. So something about Bucharest, yeah, that does make him perhaps feel rather angry. So I think you can see with this Mars line the parts of the world that Vance finds himself drawn towards, and what he gets angry about. And here is Vance's chart set for Kiev, and so you can see that Mars is exactly on the ascendant. It's even closer to the ascendant than it is if you set the chart for Moscow. And so we've just had a full moon at 22 Scorpio. So I think that is further evidence that this full moon is about his views on the Russia-Ukraine war and how he's articulating them. Now, this line that we saw in terms of astrocartography, when you relocate his chart for Moscow or Ukraine as Moscow or Kiev or Bucharest, it stays there, all the time. So, when he becomes president, if he becomes president in 2028, this part of the world is still going to be an issue for him. So I'm thinking that his presidency, if he does become presidency, a lot of his efforts are going to be in terms of dealing with Europe and how Europe's relationship with the EU unfold, and also what is Russia's relationship going to? Sorry, what is America's relationship going to be with Russia? And finally, I just want to have another look at his Vedic chart. I've looked at his Vedic chart before, but I haven't been looking at it for some time. Just a reminder about what's going on over the next few years. So here is his Vedic chart, and with Vance's Vedic chart, we see that he is in his Saturn Dasha. So his Saturn Dasha started on the 19th of April 2024. So just before he was announced as Trump's pick to be vice presidential candidate. Now, this period lasts a long time. His Saturn Dasha will continue until 2043. So you could argue that it covers his career at the very top of American politics and beyond. Now, Vance's Saturn is in Libra in the third house. It is conjunct Mars, but it's exalted in Libra, and it's in the third house. The third house is an Upachaya house, and so malefics work quite well in the third house. So overall, this is a fortunate time for him, and this has already been confirmed by the fact that he and Trump won the election, and he did well in the debate against Waltz. That debate really seemed to turn the campaign. I watched that debate, and after that, a lot of the criticism of Vance started to die down. And yeah, he's still in his Saturn Dasha, and the first part of his Saturn Dasha will continue. The first Subdasha, where you have Saturn as the ruler of both the main Dasha and the Subdasha, that will continue until the 23rd of April 2027. And the Subdasha covering the election is the Saturn Mahadasha and the Mercury Minor Dasha. Now, Saturn, using the Shadbala system, is the strongest planet in Vance's chart. It really does help the fact that it's in Libra and it's in the sign of its exaltation. And if you look at his Navamsha chart, shows that he has got Saturn in the 10th in Aquarius in his Navamsha chart. I mean, I'm not a great expert on Vedic astrology, but the Navamsha chart is another chart one should be looking at, and Saturn's quite strong in that Navamsha chart. And additionally, he's got Mercury in the first house in his in his Vedic chart. Okay, he's got Mercury in Virgo in his Western chart, but it goes back into Leo. But Mercury is pretty strong. It's a second, using the Shadbala system, it's the second strongest chart in his, second strongest planet in his chart. So it seems to me that Saturn major dasha and Mercury minor dasha at the time of the election does bode well. So, at the moment, looking at things, I think that, there really is an excellent chance that Vance will be the president after the elections in 2028. Of course, he could become president before if something happens to Trump. So, those are a few more thoughts about Vance. And, my main point is that this full moon, I believe, was really important for Vance. And I think it did change things, and it made him aware of what it means to be vice president, and maybe also some of the limitations on that position. But I'm sure I'll be talking more about Vance in the future. So thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.